Welcome back. In this video, we're going to set up our Node server so we can build a production-ready API. We're going to be using the Express framework and all of the tools and knowledge that has already been built around Express. So first thing, in our terminal, we're going to change directory into our server folder because remember, now we have both a client and a server where the client is its own NPM package. So we're going to change directory, cd into server, and set up our NPM package, npm init -y, which will now allow us to npm install Express as a dependency. To make our development life a little bit easier, we'll also set up nodemon, so we don't have to restart our server manually every time we change any of our source code files. So I'll npm install, and this time nodemon will be a development dependency. It's not used by our code, but instead as a tool to make our development life easier. So that's --save-dev nodemon. All right, so what do we have now? Our package JSON is called server. So let's rename that to NASA-project-API, which is the NASA Mission Control API. And we can add some scripts. For example, it's common to have a watch script, which uses nodemon and monitors for any changes during development, or watches for changes. All right, but the client, that front end that our NASA engineers sent us, has all of the source code inside this src folder, which is nice because it separates our configuration, for example, our package.json, from our JavaScript code. So we're going to follow the same pattern in our server, so we're consistent. So let's create a src folder inside of our server, and we'll move all of our JavaScript into this folder. So server.js, as well as our models and our routes. Now, everywhere we point to server.js in our package.json, we'll need to make sure to point to src/server. From here, we'll be setting up Express, like we did before, and I could copy and paste the Express boilerplate code, but we learn best by repetition. It helps to consider and reconsider the code that we're already familiar with in the context of all the new knowledge that we've gained. How might what we already know change given the different project that we're working on? For example, our server needs to run on some port. But remember, our Create React app front end over here runs on port 3000 by default. So it helps us if we run our backend server on a different port. Let's say port 8000. This way, it doesn't conflict with the port that's serving our front end on port 3000. And we'll also make our port configurable so that it defaults to 8000, but the server administrator can specify which port it should run on as an environmental variable, which we can access by calling the built-in process module. And just like we called our args to get the command line arguments, we'll be calling process.env to get the environment, specifically the port variable. And then we'll use this OR syntax, which effectively checks if there's a port specified in the environment, and if not, if that's undefined or falsy, it goes to the default 8000. So now if we decided later on that sometimes we want to run on port 5000 in our package JSON, we could specify as an environmental variable the port using this syntax, port equals 5000, and then node source/server.js. So now in our server.js, if we, let's say, just log the port and save our package.json, what's going to be logged when we run npm start? npm start, check it out. Our port was set to the environmental variable. And now if we remove that and run our program again, we have the default 8000. Now, in our server.js, we could import Express like we did before, set up Express, and call app.listen on that Express object. But let's demonstrate another very common way of creating an Express server, which is a little bit more flexible. So I'm going to comment this out for a second and remove our log. And we're going to instead create our HTTP server using the Node built-in HTTP module. And we'll assign our server to the result of http.createServer, which takes in as an argument that requestListener function, which responds to all incoming requests to our server. So we'll see something goes into that function. But first, let's start our server up with server.listen. And we're going to listen on this port over here. So it needs to be defined above. And we're going to log when our server is ready. So in our callback function, we'll log which port it's listening on. Listening on port. So far, so good. But what handles our requests? What do we pass in to create server? Well, the truth is, we can take our Express code here, specifically these first two lines, and if I copy them over to the top of my file here, I can now pass in Express, this app object specifically, into create server. And any middleware and route handlers that I attach to this app object will respond to requests coming in to our server. Express is really just a fancy listener function for our built-in Node HTTP server. And the listen function that we get from Express that we can call on app is exactly the same as the listen function on our server object. We can use either of them to start our Express server. The added benefit of this is that now we can organize our code a little bit more by separating the server functionality that we have here from our Express code, which we're going to put into a new file called app.js. And this is going to have all of our Express code. So let's move that out of server.js into app.js and set the module.exports to be this app object from Express, which we can now import in server.js. So it's going to be const, and the app is now coming in from this relative import, require /app, and that's the app that we pass in to our HTTP server. We'll see later in the course, when we talk about things like WebSockets, that starting our server in this way, using the built-in HTTP server, allows us to not only respond to HTTP requests, but also to other types of connections. For example, to use WebSockets for real-time communication as opposed to sending requests and waiting for the response. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. But for now, we can truly see that Express is just middleware that we add on top of the built-in Node HTTP server, which we can use to organize our request handler by making routes and using middleware. For example, we know that our Express server is going to take in some JSON data, so we can using our middleware function, the built-in express.json middleware, which will parse any incoming JSON from the body of incoming requests. And now we've separated all of our Express middleware from our server functions to organize our code just a little bit better. This is a structure that we can use for any scale of Node application going forward. Let's implement some more functionality in the next video. I'll see you soon.